Good evening, everyone. Today we're having a serious but necessary conversation about maternal mental health, one that requires compassion, honesty, and care. This episode discusses postpartum mental illness, the mental health crisis, and cases involving harm to children. Welcome to this special episode of Her Perspective. I'm your host, Tetra Shockley. Tonight, we're going to come to understand what it means to suffer from mental health disease and the criminality behind it. We understand that this subject may be difficult for some viewers, so please take care of yourself while watching. Motherhood is often portrayed as one of the happiest moments in a woman's life, but the emotional and psychological challenges are not always discussed. Today, we're examining postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and postpartum psychosis, including how families can recognize warning signs and respond when there's a mental health concern. We'll also explore what happens when severe mental illness intersects with the criminal justice system. Joining me is a panel built exactly for this conversation. Tonight, we have Dr. Ashanda, OBGYN professor and national maternal health leader who co-chairs New York City's Maternal Mortality Review Committee. We also have Alicia Porter Esquire, partner at Kivioja, Shockley, and Porter Law, who will walk us through exactly what's happening inside the courtroom. And last, we have Sharece Sellem-Hannah, community health educator who works with organizations and communities. Our goal today is not to sensationalize tragedy or excuse harm. It is to understand the medical and legal complexities involved, honor the lives affected, and help families recognize when someone may need immediate support. Tonight's show is inspired by the Lindsay Clancy trial. We're going to start off trying to get an understanding and a basis of maternal mental health. And again, we have the perfect panel to help us do that. Ladies, welcome to Her Perspective. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Alicia, I'm going to start with you. I advised our audience tonight that you're an attorney, a partner at Kivioja, Shockley, and Porter Law, where you specialize in criminal law, right? You're a criminal defense attorney. So before we start this conversation, can you explain to our audience who is Lindsay Clancy and what is happening with her trial and case that brought us all together tonight?
Sure can. So in case you live under a rock, Lindsay Clancy has been tried for murder. She has 3 counts of homicide. One is her daughter, Cora, who was age 5 at the time, her son, Dawson, age 3, and her other son, Callan, who was only 8 months old. The defense is that she lacked criminal responsibility, and the prosecution has the burden of proof to prove that she did not lack that criminal responsibility and that she should be found guilty of all 3 charges.
And what is, when you say that her defense is that she lacked criminal responsibility,
Yeah.
what specifically is she saying was, for lack of a better word, the cause of her actions?
She's saying she lacked criminal responsibility because of her a mental illness or mental defect.
Okay.
And so her defense is that she had this mental illness or defect and it caused her to not understand what she was doing.
Okay. So thank you for that. I think it's important for our audience. Everyone may not know about Lindsay Clancy. Like you said, maybe they're under a rock and they don't know what's going on. So I just wanted I wanted you to have an understanding of why we're here and what exactly we're discussing when we talk about Lindsay Clancy. Also, we are live on our social media platforms, so please join the conversation. We will be checking in throughout the night to see what you have to say and see what your questions are, so feel free to check in with us on our social media platforms. Dr. Ashanda, I'm going to turn it over to you, our expert in maternal mental health. What changes happen emotionally after childbirth that people often don't talk about?
Right, and I want us to really ground ourselves in this conversation to know that sometimes this happens during the pregnancy as well. It's not isolated to just after you deliver, right? And we want to also be mindful that This can happen if you have a live birth, a stillbirth, ectopic pregnancy, or a miscarriage. And so you have that fluctuation of hormones that can be very drastic, right? And that can change so many symptoms in your body. So again, there's sleep deprivation, so you are not getting enough cell recovery. You know, you may be caring for another person as well as a family, right? You may have teary moments, and you may have insomnia where you cannot sleep at all. You have mood swings. And so it is the totality of the hormonal fluctuations, the sleep deprivation, and then the changes. Now, we have something called the baby blues, right? And typically that lasts, you know, about a week, you know, in duration, but typically happens 3 to 5 days after you give birth, right? And then there is postpartum depression. But I want to recognize that 1 in 5 people, birthing people, women, can have what's called a PMAD, a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, most commonly depression or anxiety.
Okay. And Alicia, you followed the Lindsay Clancy trial pretty closely. And so with some of the things that Dr. Ashanda is describing that can happen and happens far too often in women during pregnancy, but in this case, we're talking about things that Ms. Clancy experienced after pregnancy. Have you heard any of these words that you're hearing from Dr. Ashanda show up in the trial? And if so, which ones? How are these symptoms playing out in this case?
Absolutely. So one of the issues that I think is being argued between the state and the defense is it really postpartum? Because her first symptoms didn't manifest until about 4 months after she gave birth to her latest son, Callan. And so the DSM-5, I believe, is from what the testimony said, is that it's limited to 4 weeks. And then there's tons of other review books that extend that far beyond, almost to a year. And so the Commonwealth's experts said it's not postpartum, it's a depressive disorder.
And when you say Commonwealth, so for
That's
those
the
of us
state.
in Delaware or other states, not everybody lives in a state that has a Commonwealth.
Right.
So that would be like the state, the prosecutors.
The state,
Yeah.
yes. So like
Okay.
in Delaware, we have the state of Delaware, we call
Right.
them, the state, and I think in the Clancy trial, they call it the Commonwealth or the government. And so they are saying it's not postpartum because it's outside that 4-week window, and the defense expert is calling it postpartum because it started to manifest itself around 3 months, and then she started to get help at 4 months, and it was still manifesting itself, and so they consider that postpartum depression.
Okay. And this question is really for any of you. You mentioned briefly postpartum depression, but because I followed the trial as well, and so I know there's a lot of talk in this trial about postpartum psychosis. And if I can be completely honest, that's not something I'd heard of before this trial. So, Dr. Ashanda, I guess you're probably the person best able to answer this question. Is one, how common is postpartum psychosis? Because again, I'd never heard of it until this trial. And number two, how does that differ from postpartum depression?
Yeah, and I think that is a question many people have. And so let's just be very clear. Postpartum psychosis, it impacts 1 to 2 people per 1,000 births. So it is completely rare, right? But the difference between postpartum depression is you may have hallucinations, both auditory or visual. You can have severe delusional conditions. You can have extreme insomnia, right? And you have utter confusion. And so it's kind of the collection of all these symptoms that renders a diagnosis of psychosis.
And so, Sharece, I want to bring you into the conversation because from your bio, we learned that you work with organizations that serve the community. Tell us a little bit more about what you do with those organizations and how what you do and the education that you bring. Are you seeing that any of those services were offered in this case?
It's really challenging because I feel like this particular individual, Lindsay, in this case, she just seemed really isolated, right? I don't know if she was tapped in with her community enough to know what resources exist. And this is where I feel like, our systems can do a better job of resource brokering, which means basically everyone having some sort of list of comprehensive supports that could best serve this individual.
Yeah.
But as far as working with organizations, and what we do is we like to go in and we work with either staff or the community they serve and just raise awareness. And we also educate the community on the 8 dimensions of wellness so that they can find balance, make sure they're balanced in all areas. And we talk about burnout a lot. And I see a lot of that in this case as well.
Yes.
Just from what I've read on
Yeah.
it so far.
Well, I'm glad you brought us back to that because Dr. Ashanda, you touched on these symptoms, and one of the things that you talked about was insomnia, utter confusion. There's certain words that you're using that, Alicia, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation because the words I'm hearing from Dr. Ashanda are taking me back to the trial. So again, you've been following closely. You've heard these words used in this trial as well.
yes.
Another word that was used by Dr. Ashanda was hallucinations. So Lindsay Clancy, part of her defense is that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis. What is your understanding of what of the symptoms that Dr. Ashanda pointed to that Lindsay was experiencing, if at all?
She, no, she did not take the stand. So the defense had an opportunity, the defense rested, so she did not testify. But through some of the experts, you got to understand how she was feeling leading up to it, what her thought process was.
And I'm sorry, when you say through the experts, these are people who had relationship with her. So these aren't people who are just, some of them are not people who are just speaking hypothetically about just anyone who might have these diagnoses. These are people who worked with Lindsay herself.
Correct. So
Okay.
the Commonwealth's expert was able to interview her and have a conversation with her, and she was open. They said that she was open, and she explained everything, and she was cooperative with them, and obviously she was with the defense expert as well. And so she told them both the same thing, that she had some hallucinations prior to that day that she did not report. And then she had the day that she killed her children, she felt she had a man's voice. It was the first time that she had heard this man's voice, and he was commanding her to kill her children. And he told her, now's the time to do that. And he repeated that over and over to a point where she felt like she didn't have control over her own self to say no.
So Dr. Ashanda, can a person such as what Alicia is describing and those of us who are following the trial are hearing that these are the type of symptoms that Lindsay is or has alleged that she experienced, can a person who is suffering from psychosis or who is having these symptoms that Lindsay at least allegedly had, can you have those symptoms and appear normal?
Absolutely. I think so many people, again, put on the cape and they want to be super woman, super mom. And so they sometimes defer their own issues to take care of others. And so we see this all the time. And I think one of the things you brought up is many of us live in silos and live in isolation. So we're trying to cope, but we're coping in silence. Right? And so when you're trying to master all of the activities of the children, getting them to the hospital, to the doctor, to their appointments, to school, and preparing them, sometimes they forget themselves. So they may appear well, right? But they're struggling inside. And that is often done in silence.
And I think we're struggling with you saying that you can be suffering from psychosis and appear normal. So help us to bring that together in our minds, because I think one of the things that people are struggling with this case is leading up to, as a matter of fact, the day of the murders, her husband said it was the best day she had had in months, that she appeared to be doing fine. So help us understand how she appeared to be doing fine. She's having the best day she's had in months, but she's suffering from psychosis.
Well, I think also that was his interpretation of how she felt, right? And so we know that we can do screening for depression with validated tools like the Edinburgh or the PHQ-9. We have tools to do it, but that doesn't mean that, number one, we get truthful answers. Again, a lot of that is based on trust. We don't know what that information is going to be weaponized against that person. There could be fear that the children will be taken away, or just culturally, the norm is, I don't want to appear crazy, right? And so again, there are a lot of coping mechanisms that are carried out to appear normal, but you may not be normal.
So it sounds like you can be suffering from something as extreme as postpartum psychosis and still take care of the children, still go to work, still pay your bills, still do the day-to-day things. What resources are available here in Delaware? I know you work with our communities here, and my hope is that people who don't live in Delaware would look into their own communities to learn what's available there. But how do we help our community with these symptoms and these struggles?
This is a difficult question, only because we have so many grassroots programs and people don't know about them, so therefore there's this access issue, right? So there are a plethora of grassroots supports, and larger organizations can work with these organizations to then better provide access to individuals. But I wrote down a few. I know there are some women's focused programs. We have maternal health programs here in Delaware. We have suicide prevention. There was a policy that was passed recently, social policy, to support suicide prevention and post-prevention efforts. And of course, our hospitals. There are support groups that I think are underutilized. We have plenty of support groups here, and mental health resources.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to you later in the show, because if you could point us in the right direction to these resources, just in terms of where to go to look for that information, I think that's something that we need. Understanding postpartum illness is the first step. The harder conversation is recognizing when someone's symptoms become dangerous, not just for themselves, but for the people they love. So what I want us to discuss now is when mental illness becomes a crisis. Mm-hmm. So we've talked a little bit about what mental illness can look like, and again, we're just specifically talking about postpartum issues only because we're here to talk about the Lindsay Clancy trial, but we know that there are a wide variety of mental health diagnoses, or even we're going to learn that sometimes you don't even have to have a diagnosis, right? Porter will talk about that in a bit. There could just be a mental health defect that could lead to unfortunate circumstances. But what I want to know, Dr. Ashanda, is what do we look for to know that we've gone from there may be a mental health challenge here to now we're in a crisis?
Right, and I think we kind of tackle that on several different facets, right? So as an OBGYN, we work closely with our pediatricians because they're going to do those baby checks, right? And they're going to see the mom. And a lot of times they give the depression screening as well. So what we are doing is restructuring postpartum care, right? And so typically, years ago, we would just see the patient 6 weeks postpartum unless there was a problem. But we are doing those earlier check-ins, the 1 week, the 2 week. We're doing the validated screening tools for looking for depression. But again, sometimes those screening tools could say everything is fine.
Yeah.
You know, I've had patients where everything on paper looks fine, but they don't look well to me. And again, you develop this very close relationship with your patients. Towards the end of the last trimester of their pregnancy, you're seeing them every week, right? We know what's going on in their lives. And you know, there have been times where I've seen a patient a week after she had the baby. She tells me everything is fine. The screening tool says everything is negative, but she doesn't look well because I remember her before. And you know, it could be something small as she looks unkept, she looks tired, she has bags, you know, her hair could not even be done.
Yeah.
And I've had patients who I will say, I want to see you next week. I just want to check in on you, right?
Yeah.
And I also kind of delve into what's her community, what's her support network around her. You know, is mom helping her take care of the baby? Who's doing shifts at night when the baby's up all night? Is the baby colicky? Is she breastfeeding? I mean, there's so many things. And I will tell you, by the 3rd week, she said to me, you know, I'm really not doing okay. And I said, it's okay.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is...
But you were paying attention.
Yes.
And you'll see a lot in this trial that there were a lot of people not paying attention. And so, Porter, I want to come back to you because I want us to go back inside the courtroom. There are a couple, you're saying a lot, Dr. Ashanda, that for people who are watching this trial, like, you're triggering us because there's so much that what I mean is just that there's so much that you're saying that we've picked these nuggets up along the way. Like, Porter and I are both doing like this and looking at each other with certain things that you're saying. So, for instance, one of the things that you talked about was visits to the pediatrician. Well, Miss Clancy took one of the children to the doctor the day she killed the 3 children. So I'm not really sure in that case what that doctor missed, if anything. But so Porter, again, so we'll talk a little bit later more about the legal process. But for someone like me, one of the things that I've said about this trial, and I do want to hear your perspective on it, Dr. Ashanda, is that I struggle with the fact that from my perspective, there was a plan. I do not discount that there was a mental health issue here. I think it's clear and it's documented. And it started months before these children were murdered. So I 100% believe that there was a mental health breakdown here with mom that was not properly treated. My issue is that there appeared to be a plan. And what I mean by that is, for those who might not know, Ms. Clancy killed her children at a time where she had sent her husband to go get dinner. And she sent him to go get dinner at a restaurant that they had been to a couple times before, but they had never had takeout from this restaurant. This restaurant was a little further away from home than the restaurants that they would normally go to for takeout. And so it just so happened that her opportunity to kill the children was during a time where I've sent my husband a little further away than I normally would have. And she put the address to the restaurant in her phone to get the directions, but this is a place you've been to before. So we both know where this place is, so why are you putting it in your GPS except to maybe know how far, how long is it gonna take him to get there and to come back? So help somebody like me, who if I'm on the jury, I'm sensitive to the postpartum, I'm sensitive to the mental health, help me understand, is it possible to be suffering from the psychosis and have this plan?
Absolutely. I think the complexity of this is that she sought out care by multiple doctors, multiple mental health experts. I think she was on a mirage of medications, and I think not all of the providers were talking to each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? So not everyone knew what each other was doing. She made a few calls to the suicide hotline. She attempted to be admitted, right, into a facility, who then discharged her. So I think for me to formalize an opinion or a conclusion is very difficult, because I see all of the efforts along the way to kind of arrive at help and care.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to recognize is that, we are normalizing the discussion about mental health now.
Yeah.
This is
Yes.
not something we talked about before.
Yes, ma'am.
I can tell you this, we talk about postpartum depression, but interchangeably we'll say postpartum and we'll say postpartum depression. I've had medical students and residents come to me and they went to see a patient and they'll say, oh, she just keeps saying she has postpartum, and I explained to her she had the baby. Yeah, you have postpartum. And I had to explain to that medical student or resident that culturally, in many cultures, postpartum depression and postpartum are
the same thing,
interchangeably
yeah.
used. And so again, we have to, number one, make sure we're speaking the same language,
Right.
making sure all the providers are talking to each other. If this one is giving 3 different medications and this one is giving 4, are there any interactions? Do we know? And I think as we talk about kind of the advancement of medicine, the usage of electronic medical records, not all of them are integrated.
Yeah.
So sometimes you don't know what the elbow and the hand are doing.
Right. Do you, in your work, either help to bridge that gap that Dr. Ashanda is talking about, or if not, because that might not be your role to help to bridge that gap, are you seeing that gap exists?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I worked in the field of human services for over 17 years. There is a lack of a coordination model when it comes to healthcare, right? Like there are patients and clients that don't know what a referral is, right? So they need to be referred out to services. So you have to explain these things, but you also have to kind of handhold a little bit, because people need that additional support. So I feel like, honestly, she did a lot more than a lot of
most people do,
would do, right?
Yeah.
Like she really tried.
Yeah.
And to your point, there were many medications that she was prescribed. I don't know how much of it she took, but 11 of those were Black label, right? So this is, there's a lot in this.
And explain to us
story.
what that means when you say they're black labeled.
So the FDA has deemed these medications as, there could be the possibility of addiction, there could be suicidal ideations, right? So there's that warning. It's kind of like buyer beware.
Yeah.
So that's challenging, I think, in this case.
So Porter, again, when Dr. Ashanda was talking, we were both doing a lot of head nodding. What was going through your mind from the legal perspective and from inside the courtroom and what you know about what's happening inside the courtroom?
I think there is also a civil case that's going on too, and I don't practice civil law, but a lot of the case, I can see this civil lawsuit and where it's going and how it's going, and so I feel like some of these questions and how we miss these things is essentially their lawsuit, and there's two lawsuits. I think Patrick represents the children's interest.
Patrick being her ex-husband
her
and
ex-husband.
the father of the children.
Yes, and then Lindsay has her own lawsuit for her own injuries that she suffered, and so they're essentially suing the providers for missing all the signs, and I can see it playing out in the trial because she wasn't necessarily forthcoming with all of her hallucinations. She was trying to handle things herself because she was afraid that if she was truthful, that her kids were going to get taken away.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think
Yeah.
Dr. Ashanda talked about that is a fear, that's a natural fear that a lot of women have, and that's why they don't seek the help.
Yeah. And so that actually, I was going to come back to that too, because I picked up on the fact that you talked about how a lot of times, as women, we don't speak up because of stigma, or people going to think now I can't parent my children, or people going to think now I can't do my job, or people going to, question.
Or they're going to think I'm crazy.
Or they're going to think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
They're not going to let their kids come over my house anymore because they think I'm crazy.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
And then culturally, there are many cultures that don't believe in mental illness.
Yes.
Or seeing a therapist.
Right.
Or taking a medication.
Yes,
Right.
that's so true.
And-
Go ahead.
And if someone is breastfeeding exclusively, they don't want to take anything that may impact their breast milk that could be passed down to the baby. So there are a lot of myths and misconceptions, especially a new mother has who is, sleep deprived. I mean, we have to kind of look at this in the totality of the situation because it's not just one facet.
Agreed. Sometimes, despite intervention, or because intervention comes too late, a tragedy occurs. That's where medicine and the legal system begin to intersect. So Alicia, this is where I want to really bring the courtroom into this conversation. So first of all, why do you think cases involving, I want to say postpartum psychosis, but this is so rare that I don't know that it's necessarily postpartum psychosis, so maybe even postpartum depression, are so emotionally difficult for the public. This case has been very emotionally charged. Why do you think that is from just a legal perspective?
Well, I think from an emotional perspective, it's hard for anyone to think, oh, this mother killed her children. That's why there's all these conspiracy theories that Patrick did it. It wasn't her. He switched his shoes. I mean, I've read all those things too. But I think from a legal perspective, it's hard because, I mean, she did kill her children. She's admitting to killing her children. And so why should she, because she's suffering this mental illness, because a lot of people suffer mental illness.
Yeah.
So does that mean, does this open the door that now anybody can be found, not guilty because they lack the capacity, from psychosis?
Yeah.
And so I will say this, that, Massachusetts law is different. It is actually this lack of criminal responsibility. I think only
So I know where you're going, but I want you to hold tight for a second.
okay.
I know I know we want to go there,
Yes.
but give me a second because you said
Okay.
some things that got my wheels turning,
Okay,
so
okay.
I want to have this conversation. I think it's so important to have the Patrick Clancy conversation because this is driving me crazy on social media, right? So as attorney, so I'm also an attorney, I practice family law, I dabble very, very gingerly in criminal. I leave that primarily to Alicia, but we get so, when the law is involved, it's very hard for people to separate out emotion. And the law is emotionless. It just is. And so attorneys generally have the ability to see things without the emotion. And so if you take the emotion out, Alicia and I were having a conversation that, number one, most women, even if we're suffering from psychosis, and it looks like she's receiving some kind of treatment now, are not going to admit to killing our 3 children if we did not kill our 3 children. Especially we are 3 years removed from the murders at this point. She's getting some kind of help for her mental health. I would think at some point she would have said, I know I said I did it. I was drugged up. It wasn't me. It was Patrick Clancy. I just think that would have happened by now. I also think she has a very, very competent, if you're following this trial, she has a very competent attorney. And I don't think for one second, if there was this kind of, if the logic of the conspiracy theorists was in any way true, that this criminal defense attorney would let that pass by and not point the finger right back to Patrick. So I just think we kind of got to be done with that. I know we're not going to be, but I think we kind of got to be done with that theory.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Do you think it's possible that he's holding this information for a bombshell at the end, or is that just TV?
No, I don't. I just think that, again, this isn't like this murder happened 6 months ago and we've rushed to trial. There's been a lot of forensic stuff and testing this and checking on the cameras to see who was where and where was his cell phone pinging, and he's in the CVS and he calls her, she doesn't answer, but then she calls him. I mean, I just think that at some point in 3 years, if no one else, her attorney, her parents, her parents who were there testifying in her defense would say, we don't think it was our daughter. So I love how we kind of rally as as a people with these cases and take a position, but it's just not likely that that's what occurred. And again, I just don't think, as much as we try to wrestle with how could a mother kill her children, well, if you think that's crazy, how much more crazy is it to say I did it if I didn't do it? So I kind of just wanted to get that out of the way because you mentioned the conspiracy theory. I had to kind of just touch on that a little bit. But yes, you wanted to explain to us what's happening with the trial and what the burden is and how it's different in Massachusetts versus Delaware.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty unique. So when I first started watching the trial, I was like, I don't understand why this is coming in their case in chief. A case in chief is when the prosecution puts the evidence on before the defense has an opportunity to put on their evidence. And so the prosecution is putting on all this insanity defense and all this evidence of her mental illness. And so here in Delaware, the defense has a burden by the preponderance of the evidence to show that insanity, to show there's a mental defect, to show that, she lacked the wrongfulness of her actions. And that's not the way it is in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, once the defense brings that claim and says, we claim that there's a lack of criminal responsibility, then it's now the burden of the prosecutor to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she had the criminal responsibility. And the other difference is that not only does she have to prove, so here in Delaware, you prove that not only did you know that what you did was criminally wrong, right? In Massachusetts, it's an or. You could prove or she couldn't control herself. She couldn't conform her actions to the law. And so that's essentially the defense's case, is that she had this hallucination. She knew it was wrong, but she had no control. In the trial, they talk about like she had some outer body experience. She couldn't control what she was doing. And they're doing that because in Massachusetts, that still means she's not guilty because she lacked criminal responsibility. Whereas in Delaware, if she admitted that and had this trial here, it would be guilty but mentally ill.
Yeah, and I love that you are explaining that, because again, the keyboard warriors and the ChatGPT law scholars don't always understand burden, don't understand how burdens shift. Is it preponderance of the evidence? Is it reasonable doubt? Whose burden is it? And so you just, come up in your own mind with what you think it should be, and you have no idea what the actual burden is, what needs to be proven, and by who. So I appreciate that. I do want to turn our attention to our social media watchers. We have a comment from social media, At Avery, Ms. Artistry says, I think doulas should have a continuation of services the following year to check up on the well-being of mothers and give them resources for the best counseling. Dr. Ashanda, what are your thoughts on that comment?
I think we have to be very careful of the role of doulas. Doulas are non-medical, right? And so although a lot of postpartum doulas go to the home, right? I think that their services are non-medical, nor are they trained in medical conditions. So we want to be very careful. Although they're quite supportive, and there's a lot of evidence base in terms of their ability to support a mother and a birthing mother, but I want us to be very, very careful in that kind of terminology, because we can also say community health workers can bridge that gap as well and bring our patients to, number one, CBOs, community-based organizations, but also resources. So I think that one of the biggest legislations, which is the Mama Bus, is extending that Medicaid for that whole year postpartum, because as co-chair of the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, we know the majority of maternal deaths happen in the late postpartum. And late postpartum means after that 6 weeks, right? So where we used to differentiate 6 weeks and you're done, we know the most deaths happen after that. And we know nationwide, the leading cause of maternal deaths is maternal mental health conditions. So just grounding us on those stats alone, we have to acknowledge that it's not only doulas, right? We need to make sure that we normalize the discussion about mental health, that we do not weaponize or remove children and fracture families, because again, that will put people in isolation. They don't want to report what's happening, or they're fearful that it will be used against them or their children will be taken away. And again, I think as we evolve as a society, we have to be culturally sensitive that there are so many cultures that don't accept mental health as a condition. Right? And nobody wants to be labeled crazy. Right? Or we have an idea of what crazy is, and I don't want to look like that. And so when we kind of remove that stigma and we kind of talk about wellness and just being very, very forthright, like, I need help. You know? And again, we don't have a safety net where people can say, I can't do this alone. You know, I go back, I'm just going to bring one point, because years ago, a birth used to be a community event, right? If we go back and, you know, I'm saying my age, if we go back to Roots, okay? And Cicely Tyson is having the baby in the village, right? Well, one of the people that's helping her is she's surrounded by women. One of those people is Maya Angelou, right? Because that's how births happened back then, right? And so now they're isolated events. Let's talk about COVID. You were having a baby by yourself, right? Sometimes partners or husbands or spouses were not even allowed inside, right? And so again, that isolation, that social isolation, that stigma, all of these contribute.
That all plays a part. Sharece, have you had experiences with doulas helping out with the postpartum mother? Do you have resources that can provide that kind of support for ladies? Where do you fall in this part of the conversation?
I can say this, it's trending here in Delaware. There are efforts to, you know, have doula services and employ doulas. Community health worker, absolutely. Again, there was policy passed to incorporate community health workers, normalize having community health workers everywhere, boots on the ground, helping people directly. So that is active here.
And part of the support groups that you talked about, that being a resource, are there those supports for women who are suffering from postpartum depression and or psychosis?
I would say it's a little bit more broad. There are mental health support groups available online. I know the Mental Health Association here in Delaware does provide a resource where folks can hop online and speak a little bit openly about anxiety and depression and things like that.
Because one of the conversations, Alicia, that you and I had at the office was that, or actually I think we might have had it here today. We've had many conversations about this trial, but that Lindsay was refusing at points when she was inpatient going to group meetings. And one of the conversations that we had, well, you actually said that some of that might have been because some of the people in the group might have had more severe
Right.
mental health defects than
Sure,
she
yeah.
did, and she may have felt like, I don't really feel like I belong in this particular group. But had she been aware of or been made a part of groups of women who were suffering from what she was suffering from, where she could see herself and identify and not feel alone, that she may have felt more open to participate in those groups. What were your thoughts on that?
So what I said was, so my mom is a breast cancer survivor, and she got diagnosed in 2001, so years and years ago. But she still sought out other people. She wanted to know what other people's experiences were, and she wanted to get into that community so that she could see what medications they were taking, what worked for them, just as a support group of like, hey, chemo was hard today, because the rest of us didn't know what that was like.
Right.
And so similarly, Lindsay Clancy, she's talking to her family and friends, but none of them understand what she's going through. And to have that support group to be like, to support her and say, I'm having the bad day too.
Yeah.
Right.
And, have you tried this medication? I've tried this new counselor. She's working great for me. So I think that would have been phenomenal for her.
Now, I do want to talk to you, Alicia, about, you had mentioned these different words, mental illness, not guilty, criminally insane, all this legal jargon that our viewers may not quite understand. So let me ask you, what's the difference between mental illness versus not guilty or not being found criminally responsible? So I guess what I'm asking is, can you have a mental illness, commit a crime, and be found guilty, even though you have a mental illness? And we all know the answer to that is yes. And so what, from a legal perspective, is the difference between that? Because people with mental illness, I mean, we probably could argue that everybody that commits serious crimes has a level of a mental illness. So what's the difference between that and then it transitioning to a place where you could be found not criminally responsible?
So just having a mental illness in itself doesn't qualify you for lack of criminal responsibility, not guilty by reason of insanity, or even Delaware's guilty but mentally ill. So to qualify you, you have to be, there's a standard. So you either have to not understand that your conduct is wrong and criminal. And so you would do that. I think she talked about delusions is what I see it. And, from a, medical perspective, she can talk about more of that. But it's where you lack reality. You don't really realize what you're doing is wrong. And so that's a really high burden, because most of us understand what we're doing is wrong. And even Lindsay Clancy understood what she did was wrong. She admitted that. But then that next layer down is, I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't control myself. And so when you're suffering from a mental illness and you have some type of hallucination or even delusion, that you know what you're doing is wrong, but you just can't control yourself. I think you and I talked about that.
We
with
did.
So
And I want to use it as an example. So Alicia and I both have boys, and they both have been diagnosed with ADHD. And we both had experiences where, especially when they were younger, they're older now. Jaden's 15, Jax is 13, I think. 14. But when they were probably 2 and 3, we both experienced where we know they knew better because we know we taught them better, but they would still jump up on the table and jump off the table,
do it anyway.
even though they knew better. But we came to realize they couldn't help it. There wasn't the ability, there was the thought go. There wasn't that thing that said stop and process and think about if this is a good idea. And so we use that as an example, but to say, so then where's the line? Where's the line between, there won't be criminal responsibility because you couldn't have that stop and process versus you are going to be criminally responsible even though you couldn't stop and process.
So-
What's that line?
So here in Delaware, I mean, what you had just said, what happened with Jaden and Jackson, and their inability to stop their actions, and then when you would ask them, that's wrong. Yes, I know it's wrong. That is the same thing we're saying that happened with Lindsay Clancy. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she didn't have the ability to stop and control it. And so here in Delaware, she's guilty but mentally ill. And what that means is if she's guilty of murder, she serves a life sentence. And because she's guilty but mentally ill, she goes into a psychiatric center until she's stable enough and then she transfers to DOC, the Department of Corrections. But in Massachusetts, it's different. So that same scenario that we just talked about in Massachusetts, she is not guilty because she lacks criminal responsibility, and she could be sentenced to a psychiatric center. But once she's better, if she ever gets to that point, she's released to society with no criminal charge.
Wow. And so again, that's important to understand. It's important for people to understand the distinction, and also understand that even if you do know the law in one particular state, that doesn't mean that that's how another state handles things. And so I appreciate that explanation. I hope that clears, I know it, you know, us talking about it cleared it up for me, and I hope it does for our audience as well. Before we transition, do either of you ladies have something you want to add to this part of the discussion?
No, I just think that's so helpful.
Yeah.
Because that is the part that I didn't understand. You know, again, I'm coming from a medical perspective, but understanding the legality of what's happening, that kind of changes and shifts kind of how I'm viewing, and then even as I view forward, so thank you.
Yeah. And before we transition, let me ask one more question about this. And this is for whomever may know, because I don't know if based on your experience you know, and with you being a lawyer, if you know, how do forensic experts determine someone's mental state during the crime? Right? So you can, you know, you can interview someone after the fact and they'll tell you whatever they tell you, but how do these experts determine what was happening? Like, for instance, to say she was experiencing postpartum psychosis at the time she killed the children.
It's a great question.
How do you determine that?
So I actually watched how they did it in the Lindsay Clancy trial. I've never actually had a trial where that was the issue. But it's day 18, in case anybody wants to watch that. They had the defense expert testify about, he interviewed Lindsay Clancy, asked her questions, reviewed her whole history, reviewed all of the police reports, and he made a determination that, and his determination was that she was under psychosis, and it's because she had this irrational belief that her kids would not be well without her. That she did all these things. She researched how, you know, to put them in different sports and music lessons, and scheduled their day just right, and made sure their food was perfectly cut, and all these different things to schedule them to make sure they were going to be good humans. And she was the only one that could do that, and if she didn't survive, they wouldn't be good humans. And so she had this irrational thought, and then so the defense expert said, because she had that irrational thought, and then these auditory hallucinations telling her to kill the children, that coupled made him believe that she was under psychosis. So he used the evidence that was there to say, and he actually wrote a book, and they referenced it in the trial. That was he wrote the book prior to Lindsay Clancy, and it actually talks about that specific thing, that those two things coupled makes that psychosis, and that makes it his opinion that it lacked criminal responsibility. Now, the Commonwealth's expert, he found that she was not psychosis, and again used the same facts and said she had these thoughts, these hallucinations before, and she was able to say no to them. And so we think that she made a plan, and she did not experience. She could conform her actions to the law, and she could control herself, and she knew that it was wrong, and so therefore she wasn't psychotic.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for breaking that down. We do have a question from Facebook that I want us to address again before we transition out of this topic. Based on the data, how long does postpartum psychosis last? I think that's a question probably best for Dr.
And
Ashanda.
I don't think we have an actual number, right? So I think it's perhaps what do we designate postpartum psychosis in relation to after giving birth, and then psychosis on its own, right? And so right now it is of the belief that if it's within the year after delivery or of pregnancy, that it would be still in the realm of postpartum psychosis.
And I think what they may mean, because they talked about this in the trial too, and I kind of want to hear your opinion about this. So they talked about how you could be in moments of psychosis and not in psychosis. So like in the
It's like an
morning.
in and out.
Yes. So they talked about that. And so it's not some continuation is what they
Right.
said. Is that your understanding
Well,
too?
I think typically when you have someone who is of psychosis, they'll tell you 24 hours a day they don't have hallucinations, right? And so again, it may you be intermittent throughout the day, but you don't have it continuously. And so I think that is the concept that they are trying to kind of convey, is that it's not a continuum, but it may be intermittent.
Okay.
You have anything to add?
Oh, no.
It's good
a great
information.
point. Yeah, it's
Thank
a great
you
point.
so
Yeah,
much.
thank you
Okay.
for clarifying that.
Well, whether someone agrees with the court's decision or not, every one of these cases raises a bigger question. How do we prevent families from ever reaching this point? So at this point, I want to talk about prevention, healing, and hope. Dr. Ashanda, I don't know if there's an answer to how we prevent it.
Yeah.
But I hope you have some insight into to helping
I
us.
would say number one, we need to standardize and normalize the conversation about mental health and wellness, right? And that's during the pregnancy and then after, right? And so a lot of places, they are doing depression screening or anxiety screening using the GAD-7 during each trimester of the pregnancy. Some are doing it at each visit, right? Some are using the validated screening tools prior to discharge from the hospital. They are doing earlier postpartum visits. Instead of waiting the 42 days and the 6 weeks, we are seeing patients 1 week or 2 weeks. That is the recommendation of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, is to do that earlier appointment within 2 weeks. Again, I think that we want to use our partners, our community health workers, our doulas. So I want to say and recognize that I am the only physician on the New York State Coalition for Doula Access. So I am a very big doula advocate. And I think they are part of an obstetrical team. I think we need more.
Yeah.
I think we need more mental health providers. I think when we talk about the crisis that is happening in the medical deserts, we do not have enough mental health providers, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. A lot of what we're doing in this space is doing integrated medicine models because we don't have enough.
Yeah.
So we are training obstetricians to do depression screening, but also to start the medication because we don't have enough mental health providers. So I think, and then when we talk about that, we also need to talk about not every provider is accepting new patients. They may
Yeah.
not accept your insurance. You know, telemedicine has worked wonders, especially during the pandemic of COVID, where we really elevated medicine to that telemedicine platform. It's still not enough.
Yeah.
Right? And then if we kind of interject the social determinants of health, there are language barriers. There are many people who live in rural communities. There may be one car for a household and the provider's an hour away, but somebody has to go to work so they can't take the car.
Yeah.
Right? And then also, I have a lot of patients, they may not have a smart device. They may not have Wi-Fi. They may not have cellular data, right? I know as a provider, patients feel more safe at home. They are more open and forthcoming. But again, we have to recognize there are challenges of access, availability for so many people. And this is why a lot of people suffer in silence. Again, because there are not the medical therapists or mental health therapists that are available for them.
And Sharece, based on your experience, what do you have to say about that and what we can do as a community? Because I know you're actually out in the communities working with these organizations. What are the resources there, or what can we do, or
Yeah, really on this discussion about prevention, thinking about what leads up to burnout, because I see a burned out woman. I mean, I'm not sure how everyone feels, but zooming out and looking at this picture, she had babies back to back to back, right? And she was doing a lot of things, it seems like, on her own. And I know her husband did some stuff, but, you know, just looking at the whole picture, it seemed like she did a lot on her own. And so we need to recognize signs of burnout, because burnout can then turn into something a lot more serious. And so, you know, some of those signs may be losing sleep, right? having anxiety and things like that.
Yeah.
So also too, I think it's good for us to think about, you mentioned social determinants of health, which I greatly appreciate. It's a topic I'm really passionate about. And just for clarification, social determinants is where you live, sleep, eat, work, and play, right? All of those factors really matter for your health outcomes. Literally, your zip code can determine your health outcomes, right? And so just being aware, having awareness of that, having awareness of your own childhood traumas if you've had any, right? You could be more susceptible to mental health crisis later on in life if you've had severe trauma in your childhood. So another term, ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences, being familiar with that, just knowing your own history, what's in your story, right? And then being able, and so that's what, I like to educate the community on. So just constantly being aware of yourself, doing a self-check, right? Knowing the 8 dimensions of wellness, how every area in your life is doing. And so I think that's what matters.
That's
Prevention
really good.
is
And
key.
when you say the 8 areas, what are they?
Yes, so there's
Or at
financial.
least some of them.
Yeah, sure. I have to write it down because I
That's
always have to
okay.
remind
That's all
myself, right? So there's financial, right? Your physical health, your spiritual health, your emotional health, your occupational health, your intellectual health, right? Environmental health, and social health. So all of these areas thinking about it like a budget, right?
Yeah.
How much time are you spending in each of these areas, and what cup needs to be filled?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that all of those areas could point right back to the mental health, right? If you're
Exactly.
suffering in some of the, or any of these, or multiple of these areas, it's going to impact negatively your mental health.
For sure.
So I think it's important to, and what I hope that we'll do is after the show, direct our viewers to where they can get more information about those 8 things, or even just list them, so that we can do our own inventory on where are we with these eight places, these 8 areas, because to your point, Ms. Clancy did have a lot going on. She did have the babies back to back, and if I'm not mistaken, she struggled some after the birth of, if not all of these babies, at least a couple of them. And in addition to that, a couple of her births were traumatic. Like there were some really, traumatic experiences with the babies as well. And so kind of to everybody's point, even as family, coworkers, community, doing a better job of wrapping around people who we know are going through, right? And but then we also have to be able to be vulnerable enough to say when we're not okay, and showing up to be somebody's safe place. Because I also feel like as women, a lot of us don't have a safe place. We don't, even if you ask me how I'm doing, do I trust you to be honest with you about how I'm doing?
Yeah, and I just want to add to that point, I think some of us don't even know that we're not doing well. Yeah. Because we just keep going. Right? And so that's an issue.
I feel like what's normal for, like, it could be abnormal, but it's normal for us. Right? So I remember dealing with anxiety, and I'd be at work, and there would be like a pressure in my chest, and I'm just still working because I'm used to feeling that pressure in my chest, and I'm going to just work right through the pressure in my chest. And I believe in mental health. I have a therapist. Actually, Alicia and I have the same therapist, but I have a therapist, and I believe
normalize it in our
yes,
office.
in our office we all talk about Dr. Pam. Dr. Pam. Everybody, do you need a good therapist? Dr. Pam for you. You get a Dr. Pam. Everybody gets a Dr. Pam, because it's not okay to push through that, and what makes us feel like we're supposed to have to push through that, that we can't check in on ourselves and say this isn't okay. But my point is that we operate sometimes from an abnormal place so often and regularly that abnormal becomes our normal. And it makes me think about, I went to the chiropractor for the first time years ago, and he's like, okay, Ms. Shockley, stand up straight. And so I'm standing up straight, and he's like doing this to my shoulder, and he's doing this to my hip, and he's like, now you're straight. And this is how I felt. I'm like, I feel crooked. And he said, that's because you've been doing it wrong for so long. That right feels wrong. So even though to me I felt like this, I was actually straight. And when I was straight, I was crooked. And so we can be doing a thing, and even with getting, and I'm just using this as an analogy, pick it up in the spirit, what I'm saying. And even when I would get that chiropractic help, my spine would shift back at it because even my spine, once it was made straight, was like, nope, this isn't how we do it. So I would have to go weekly to train my body that, no, this is what's right. And so I think that shows up in our mental health so much, and we start to identify with what's wrong with us. This is just how I am. I just have chest pains, or I just am antsy, or I just am, and we start to accept that as part of who we are, to the point that we don't think we need help.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it is nice to have friends to be able to talk about your mental health with. So having, normalizing it like we do in our office, like we talk about it, and it's not something like, oh, she's crazy, she has a therapist, because that's the stigma. I feel like beforehand it was. And so it was like, I don't want to tell anybody that, I don't want anybody to think I'm crazy, but once you normalize it, and I think more people are starting to, then hopefully we can get more resources to people.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I think in this society, we strive for perfection, right? And again, we talked about social media and how that plays a role. Like everyone appears perfect. And so everyone wants to be the perfect mom. I got the bottles ready, I'm breastfeeding, the diapers are ready, everything is washed, the baby's sleeping. But how many times have we all, someone said, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm fine.
Right.
'Cause that's our automatic
Yeah.
response.
Right,
Do we
right.
really say what's going on, right? How many times do people appear normal,
Yeah.
right? As if everything is going fine. They're going to the gym, right?
Yeah.
That's what she did.
Yeah.
And but they're dying inside, right? And so it's really, really delicate when we kind of delve into what is really happening in someone's life, right? Because can I trust to tell you this? What will you do with that information?
Yeah.
Will you write it in my chart? Will someone bring it up later?
Right.
Will there always be in my chart
Right.
that this happened? This often happens with kind of talking about substance use or all these things that can be used, right? And I just wanted to go back to what you said about trauma, right? And generational trauma and stressors, right? We know what weathering does. Weathering is, generational toxicity and traumas that impact somebody's medical condition. Can cause diabetes, can cause anxiety, stress, hypertension, right? And we know that there's studies from Harvard that say epigenetics, right? Trauma can start in the womb.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? So as a baby is growing in its mother's womb, but being exposed to trauma just from what the mother goes through.
Yeah.
So there are so many layers to this, but I really want us to really think about how many times when someone says, how are you doing, you say fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think it is okay if somebody asks how you're doing to say fine, because not everybody's a safe place to share with how you're actually doing. But I think it's important to make sure you have people in your life that it is safe to say, I'm not doing fine. I'm not okay. And let me tell you why or what's going on or what have you. So I think, we're not all going to just spill on every single person who says, how are you doing? But it's important to have a community of people who you can share how you're feeling.
Yeah. And you never want to unload on the wrong person,
Right.
right? Because they're like, listen, that's not what I asked.
I didn't really want the answer. I wanted you to tell me fine. So I'm going to close out by asking each one of you one final question. But before I do that, is there anything else that you want to share, either about this case or about mental health, community resources, the law, how it all intersects, that you didn't have an opportunity to share by way of the questions that I asked during this show?
Well, I would just like to say, as an obstetrician, motherhood is not an easy path.
Yeah.
It is a journey. And what I would really, really advocate is, make sure that you have a community around you, whether that's your healthcare provider, whether that's your doula, whether that's your community health worker, but know that you should never feel alone, be alone. There should always be help out there for you.
Thank you. Anything you want to add?
I want to be like Red when I grow up.
They're calling him Big Red, right?
Yeah, Big Red. So Reddington is the defense attorney, in case anybody doesn't know that. But yeah, I think there was they were making shirts for him or something.
Yeah.
But,
He's really good.
yeah, he's doing a great job.
That's awesome. Well, a dose of prevention is worth an ounce of cure, right? So, being preventative, right? Taking the measures, taking the steps, doing a self-check, checking in with yourself,
Yeah.
and thinking about those 8 dimensions of wellness. What is your budget looking like
Yeah.
in those areas?
So again, I want to ask each one of you just one final question, because these questions I think are important to wrap up this conversation, and I want the audience to hear at least one of you answer each of these questions. So I'll start with you, Sharece. What support systems do you think every mother should have after childbirth?
Ooh, access to healthy relationships. Healthy relationships, people that you can trust. And I know that's hard because not everyone has that.
Yeah.
But that, and as well as a wellness toolkit, like your go-to for when you are feeling low or you're experiencing crisis.
Yeah.
Like, what are some key things that you can identify that you're going to do so you're not trying to scramble around last minute while you're experiencing the moment?
And for people who feel like they don't have that safe place, because to Dr. Ashanda's point, there are some cultures and families that just don't believe in talking about your feelings. There are some cultures and families that don't believe in therapy and mental health. And if that's what you have around you, if that's the kind of village you have around you, that's not a safe place.
Right.
Do you have any resources, recommendations for the person out there who doesn't, that genuinely feels like, I don't have anyone? Where can they go to look for that support?
Honestly, it starts with a call to 211, and then from there.
So tell us what 211 is.
It's an emergency hotline, really, for any emergency services that you may be experiencing, if it's mental health, anything. You just call there, and then they can direct you to proper resources.
I love that. So, because again, people might not know a therapist, and we've talked
Right.
about how the fact some people don't even have a primary care.
Right.
If something's going on with them, they just go to urgent care or the emergency because they don't
Right.
even have a primary care
They don't have OBG,
provider. So
yeah.
I love that information, 211. Alicia, my question for you is, what do you hope women understand after watching today's conversation?
I hope they understand that this is, mental health is okay, to talk about your mental health is okay, and that there are resources available to reach out to your doctors, to normalize this. I would love for there to be support groups for postpartum mothers, even whether they're postpartum depression or they just postpartum in general, because they experience a lot of things even if they're not necessarily, they don't think they're depressed.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of us don't think, we're like, oh no, I'm not depressed, I'm just busy, or I'm just lack of sleep because my baby doesn't sleep,
Yeah.
right? And so that would be to normalize groups where mothers get together and they talk about these things,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
have, their children can have little play dates even though they're just babies. But I think that would be my hope.
And Dr. Ashanda, we talked a bit, not as much as I would like to have had, but this case is so complex we can't cover everything in this one setting. But if you follow the case, you recognize, at least in my opinion, that Patrick Clancy was a little too clueless for me about what was happening with his wife. He just didn't know enough. And whether that was his fault or not, he just, in my opinion, didn't know enough. So my question to you is, what do you wish every partner understood about postpartum mental health?
Wow, I think that's a great question. I think before I answer it, I want to recognize that there are so many mothers, despite having a partner, maybe not being a single parent, but still they feel alone.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they are alone. So what I want the partners to do the work too.
Yeah.
Right? I want them to kind of not only help out with the physical activities or the labor that's needed at home or caring for the children, but also caring for the mothers, caring for their spouse.
Right.
How many times do I have patients where they're clearly sleep deprived, but there's two members at home. There's a lot of, leaps and bounds we've made for paternity leave. And so men get that
Yeah.
time off. So, are they helping out, right? And I think there's also a myth and misconception that if the mother is exclusively breastfeeding, dad gets to sleep the whole night.
Right. And that is a
So-
misconception. At least should be. Then you
So-
change the pamper, right? If I have to
Right.
get up to do the feeding, you
Right.
change
And
the.
some men will say, "Well, I don't change Pampers," right? And
You do now.
so there are parenting classes for the partners,
Yeah.
for the spouse, but I think that there's an opportunity where you can be active.
Yes.
And again, be partners. A partnership means a unified effort.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would love there not to be so many women and birthing parents who feel alone, even though they're in a two-parent household.
Right.
And in closing, with 3 or less words, fill in the blank. Dr. Ashanda, every mother deserves.
They deserve peace, they deserve hope, and they deserve joy.
Alicia, I wish more people understood.
Mental health.
Sharece, asking for help is.
Advocacy, and it's self-care.
And I say healing begins with honesty. Thank you all for helping us approach this difficult conversation with clarity, compassion, and care. If there's one thing we hope every viewer takes away from today's discussion, it's that maternal mental illness is not a personal failure, and no mother should have to suffer in silence. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Recognizing the warning signs and responding early can make a meaningful difference for mothers and their families. If anything discussed today feels familiar to you or reminds you of someone you love, please reach out to a qualified healthcare professional or trusted support system. If you believe someone may be in immediate danger, seek emergency assistance right away. There is no shame. We're going to leave you with resources that can take you to the next step. And we thank you for joining us for this special episode of Her Perspective. Please take care of yourself and one another. And if you or someone you love is struggling in any way with mental health, call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Hotline. And the Postpartum Support International telephone number for those who need it is 1-800-944-4773. On behalf of my guests, I am Tetra Shockley. I thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for joining us on DETV's Her Perspective Special Edition. Have a good night.